The year is 117 AD. On a hill overlooking 1 million people stands a palace unlike anything the ancient world has ever built. The Palatine Hill, the birthplace of Rome itself, is now consumed entirely by marble, gold, and power. Banquet halls stretch 300 feet. Fountains echo through colonnaded gardens. Hundreds of slaves move silently through corridors of polished stone. This is not merely a residence. This is the center of an empire spanning 3 continents, 40 million souls, and 5,000 miles of frontier. Yet inside these gilded walls, Emperor Trajan lies dying far from Rome, in a coastal town on the edge of the empire he built. A succession crisis ripples toward the Palatine. And in the summer of 117 AD, this palace is about to witness its most dangerous transition of power. We recreate this world using AI to help you step inside the Imperial Palace as it truly existed. Stay until the end to see how Rome's greatest dynasty navigates the knife's edge between glory and collapse. Before we step through the gates of the Palatine Palace, it helps to understand what Rome had become by the time 117 AD arrived. Because this is not a city at its beginning. This is a city at the absolute summit of everything it had ever tried to be. Let's begin earlier, roughly a century before our story. Picture Rome in the reign of Augustus, the first emperor who famously claimed he had found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. That transformation had been building ever since. Each emperor added to the Palatine Hill. Each dynasty stamped its character into stone. By 117 AD, and the hill was not simply a place where an emperor lived, it had become, in the minds of Romans, a sacred geography. The very word palatium, palace, was born from this hill. Imagine arriving in Rome for the first time in 117 AD. You enter through one of the great road arteries, the Via Appia perhaps, lined with tombs and statues stretching back miles into the countryside. As you move deeper into the city, the scale overwhelms you. 1 million people packed into streets that rarely exceed 15 feet in width. The noise is extraordinary. Vendors shout, carts rattle on stone pavements. Somewhere ahead, the Circus Maximus can hold 250,000 people, more than any stadium on Earth at this moment. And then you see the Palatine, rising above the Forum, above the circus crowds, above the tenement blocks and the marketplaces, a hill crowned entirely in white marble. Terraces cascade downward. Aqueducts feed fountains you can hear before you see them. This is where the emperor lives, where the Praetorian Guard stands watch, where the fate of 40 million people is decided over dinner. At this time, the man who rules from that hill is the Emperor Trajan, Marcus Ulpius Traianus, warrior, administrator, and the man the Senate will eventually name Optimus Princeps, the best ruler. He had expanded Rome to its absolute greatest territorial extent. Dacia conquered. Mesopotamia taken. The empire stretched from Scotland to the Persian Gulf. But in early 117 AD, Trajan is not on the Palatine. He is campaigning in the east, aged 63, his body beginning to fail after decades of war. The palace functions without him, because a palace of this scale never truly sleeps. Secretaries draft correspondence. Freedmen administrators manage provinces. The Empress Plotina oversees the household. The machinery of empire turns whether the emperor is present or not. Think about the world this palace presides over. 40 provinces, hundreds of client kingdoms, legions stationed from the Rhine to the Euphrates. All roads, quite literally, lead back to this hill. From the world outside, let's step now through the palace gates themselves. And to understand what we are entering, it helps to understand how this complex came to exist, because the Imperial Palace of 117 AD was not designed by a single mind. It was built by ambition, dynasty by dynasty, across more than a century. Begin here. The Palatine Hill, in the time of Augustus. The first emperor deliberately chose to live modestly, by imperial standards, in a house connected to the temple of Apollo. He understood something crucial. Romans were suspicious of kings. The word rex, king, was poison in Roman ears since the founding days of the Republic. So Augustus called himself princeps, first citizen, and his home, while comfortable, was designed to project republican restraint. His successors were less restrained. Tiberius built the first truly monumental imperial residence, the Domus Tiberiana, on the northwestern edge of the hill. It was enormous by any standard of the ancient world. Caligula extended it, pushing it toward the Forum so he could literally walk across a bridge into the temple of Castor and Pollux, as if descending among men as a god. Then came Nero, and Nero changed everything. After the Great Fire of 64 AD consumed vast stretches of Rome, Nero seized the opportunity and the land to build the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. It spread across the Palatine, the Esquiline, and the valley between them. Its main dining room rotated. Its ceilings rained flowers and perfume on guests below. An enormous artificial lake sat where the Colosseum now stands. Romans joked bitterly, "Now Rome has become a house. Flee to Veii, citizens, if only the Golden House does not swallow Veii too." Nero's successors dismantled the Domus Aurea's excesses. Vespasian drained the lake and built the Colosseum. But on the Palatine itself, the momentum of imperial building continued. It was Domitian, emperor from 81 to 96 AD, who finally unified the Palatine into the coherent palace complex that stands in 117 AD. His architect, Rabirius, was a genius. Rabirius solved the Palatine's greatest problem. The hill was uneven, fragmented, full of old republican structures and the memory of earlier dynasties. Rabirius essentially built a new artificial platform, a leveled terrace of vaulted substructures, on which he constructed two great wings. The first wing was the Domus Flavia, public, ceremonial, the face of imperial power. Picture its great audience hall, the Aula Regia, columns of Pavonazzetto marble, purple-veined and quarried in Phrygia, rise to a height of nearly 50 feet. Statues of black basalt gods flank the walls. The floor is a mosaic of colored stones arranged in geometric patterns so precise they seem to vibrate with intention. This is where the emperor receives senators, ambassadors, foreign kings, generals returning from war. The room is designed to make every visitor feel small. It succeeds. Adjacent to the Aula Regia, the Basilica, where Trajan's judicial functions are performed in his absence. Legal disputes from across the empire find their resolution here, a freedman's secretary translating Greek petitions into Latin, a senior official rendering judgment in the emperor's name. Beyond the formal wing, separated by a great peristyle garden with a central fountain pool shaped like a four-petaled flower, lies the second great wing, the Domus Augustana. Private, residential, the actual home. At this time, in early 117 AD, the Domus Augustana is managed by the Empress Plotina and a household staff numbering in the hundreds. Plotina is not a woman who sits quietly. She is educated, politically engaged. Syrian devoted to Stoic philosophy, she had personally advocated for Epictetus, the freed slave philosopher, to continue teaching. Her apartments on the upper level of the Domus Augustana open onto a private garden terrace with views across the Circus Maximus. Below her, the palace breathes. Slaves carry water. Cooks prepare meals for hundreds of staff. Secretaries ab epistulis for correspondence. draft letters in both Latin and Greek. The palace is not merely a home, it is a government in miniature, capable of running the empire for months without the emperor's physical presence. And somewhere in that great administrative machinery, the question everyone is beginning to whisper, though no one dares say aloud, is growing louder with each dispatch arriving from the east. Is Trajan coming home? Imagine being a senior freedman administrator in the Imperial Palace in the spring of 117 AD. You have served in this complex for 20 years. You know its rhythms, the way the Aula Regia fills with light at mid-morning, how the garden fountains are shut off at night to reduce noise, which senators arrive early to wait outside the audience chamber, and which arrive deliberately late to signal they feel no urgency. You know this palace the way a body knows its own heartbeat, and now the heartbeat is irregular. The dispatches from the east grow stranger. Trajan has suffered what the couriers describe carefully in bureaucratic language as a deterioration of health. He had campaigned brilliantly through Mesopotamia, taking Ctesiphon, the Parthian capital, reaching the Persian Gulf and reportedly weeping that he was too old to follow Alexander's path to India. But the East had pushed back. Jewish revolts erupted across Cyrene, Egypt, Cyprus, and Mesopotamia simultaneously, the Kidos War, threatening to unravel his eastern conquests, and then Trajan's body began to fail. Paralysis, possibly a stroke. By the summer of 117 AD, the palace is gripped by controlled tension. On the surface, everything functions normally. The daily salutatio, the morning greeting ceremony, still brings senators and petitioners to the Aula Regia. Correspondence still flows. Judgments are still rendered. But in the corridors and gardens, conversations stop when certain people approach. Eyes move differently. The central question is succession. Trajan had no biological son. He had, by most accounts, never formally adopted an heir. His nearest male relative by blood and proximity was Publius alias Hadrianus, Hadrian, a Spaniard like Trajan himself, his ward since childhood, currently serving as governor of Syria. Hadrian is capable, educated, deeply interested in architecture and Greek philosophy. He is also mistrusted by many in the Senate, who find him arrogant and who fear what his rule might bring. Inside the Palatine, the person who holds the thread of this succession in her hands is Plotina. Picture her in the private apartments of the Domus Augustana. She has received the latest dispatch. Trajan is at Selinus in Cilicia, a small coastal town, and his condition is critical. He will not reach Rome. She knows this. A small circle knows this. The weight of what comes next falls on decisions made in the next hours, in these marble rooms by people who understand that the wrong move could mean civil war. What happens next is one of the most contested moments in Roman imperial history. According to the official account, recorded later, challenged by contemporaries, Trajan formally adopted Hadrian on his deathbed at Selinus. The announcement reached Rome after Trajan's death on August 8th or 9th, 117 AD. But ancient sources, including Cassius Dio writing a century later, suggest that Plotina may have managed or even staged this adoption, that perhaps the announcement was crafted in her correspondence, that the voice speaking for Trajan may have already been Plotina's alone. We cannot know with certainty. But consider the palace in those days between Trajan's death and the arrival of the news in Rome. The staff continues its routines. The guards rotate, the gardens are watered, the kitchen prepares meals, and somewhere in the private rooms, a woman who loved this palace and understood its machinery is deciding how history will be written. When the news reaches Rome, Trajan is dead, Hadrian is emperor, the response inside the Palatine is not chaos, it is managed. The Praetorian Guard, whose commander Attianus was Hadrian's former guardian, declares for Hadrian immediately. The Senate ratifies the succession. There is no armed conflict in the streets, no palace coup in the visible sense, but within weeks, 4 senior senators, former consuls, men of great influence who had opposed Hadrian, are executed. The official reason? Conspiracy against the new emperor. Hadrian would claim, publicly and repeatedly, that he had not ordered these deaths, that the Praetorian Guard acted without his command. Almost no one in Rome believed him. Imagine standing in the Aula Regia as Hadrian's first formal imperial audience is conducted. The same purple-veined marble columns, the same basalt statues of gods at the walls, the same geometric mosaic floor. Everything looks identical to the day before, yet everyone in the room knows, with absolute certainty, that everything has changed. The man seated where Trajan sat is not Trajan. And the age of conquest, the relentless outward push that had brought Rome to its greatest territorial extent, is already, quietly, beginning to reverse. Hadrian has already decided. He will give back Trajan's Mesopotamian conquests. He believes the empire has grown beyond its capacity to defend. He will consolidate, not expand. He will build walls, literal walls. Ike in Britain, in Germany, to define what Rome is and is not. The age of limits is beginning. All of this is decided. Here, inside these walls, in rooms that still smell of Trajan's court. Let's continue inside those walls as Hadrian settles into the palace that now belongs entirely to him. He walks it differently than Trajan did. Trajan was a soldier emperor who held court in grand public displays of strength. Hadrian is something stranger, something Rome has not quite encountered in an emperor before. He is an intellectual, an architect, a man who sketches building plans in the margins of correspondence. He speaks Greek fluently, prefers it, some say, to Latin. He had been initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries in Athens. His enemies, and there are many, call him Grieculus, the little Greek, as an insult. Walking through the Domus Flavia, Hadrian does not merely inhabit the space. He evaluates it. He is already designing, in his mind, what will become the Villa Adriana at Tivoli, a vast private complex that will eventually reproduce elements of every magnificent place he has ever seen. The Palatine Palace is, for Hadrian, a working tool, a place for governance. His true architectural imagination will be expressed elsewhere, but he governs from here. He rises before dawn. This is documented. He moves quickly. He has an astonishing memory, reportedly able to recall the name of every soldier he had ever commanded. In the early months of his reign, he holds audiences, settles disputes, reads and annotates correspondence. He is, despite all the suspicion surrounding his accession, an extraordinarily competent emperor. And the palace, which has seen Augustus and Tiberius and Caligula and Claudius and Nero and the chaos of 69 AD's 4 emperors and the steady Flavian dynasty, and now this singular, complicated, brilliant man settles into a new rhythm around him. What had once been the palace of conquest, of dispatches announcing new provinces, of generals received with military triumph, now became something subtler, something harder to name. Under Hadrian, the Imperial Palace on the Palatine transforms in character if not in stone. The Aula Regia still receives its embassies. The Secretariat still processes thousands of documents annually. But the tenor of what is decided here shifts fundamentally. Hadrian is the first emperor to travel extensively and systematically through the empire's provinces, spending more than half his reign outside Rome, visiting Britain, Gaul, Germany, Spain, Greece, Asia Minor, Egypt, North Africa. When he travels, the palace travels with him in miniature, a mobile court of secretaries, advisors, architects, and philosophers. The Palatine in his absence is managed by trusted freedmen administrators, a system Trajan had also relied upon, but which Hadrian systematizes further. For the first time in Roman imperial administration, something approaching a genuine civil service begins to take clearer shape. Equestrians, the second rank of Roman society below senators, begin to hold positions that had formerly been the territory of imperial freedmen. The palace bureaucracy professionalizes. Think about what this means for the people inside these walls daily. Not a secretary ab epistulis grisis, responsible for Greek correspondence, now handles communications with a vast Eastern empire whose educated classes conduct all serious business in Greek. His counterpart for Latin correspondence manages the Western provinces. Between them, they process the information of an empire. They read petitions from provincial citizens who have traveled months to have a grievance heard. They draft imperial rescripts, legal rulings that will shape Roman law for generations. The palace kitchens tell their own story of transformation. Trajan was famously moderate in his personal habits, a soldier's appetite, simple tastes. Hadrian is more complex. He enjoys elaborate dinner parties. He invites poets, philosophers, architects to dine. The great triclinium of the Domus Flavia, the imperial dining room, are vast enough to seat hundreds, becomes a stage for intellectual performance as much as political display. By the early 120s AD, Hadrian has also begun construction that will define his reign physically. The Pantheon in Rome is rebuilt under his supervision, that perfect dome of concrete, its oculus open to the sky, a mathematical wonder. He rebuilds it not with his name on the front. He leaves Agrippa's original dedication, a deliberate gesture of imperial modesty that is itself a form of propaganda. What had once been the household of a conqueror has become the household of a curator. A man who believes Rome's greatness lies not in how far its legions march, but in how well its civilization endures. The palace walls hold both visions now, Trajan's marble trophies and Hadrian's architectural drawings, two understandings of empire occupying the same space. Step back now to the Palatine's great garden terrace. Stand at its edge. Below you, the Circus Maximus stretches along the valley floor, 250,000 seats empty this afternoon, the sand raked clean for tomorrow's races. Beyond it, across the Tiber, the hills of the Janiculum rise pale in the afternoon light. The city spreads in every direction farther than the eye resolves into detail. Rooftops and temple columns and the smoke of 1,000,000 cooking fires rising in the still air of a Roman afternoon. From here, in 117 AD, you can trace what this palace has witnessed in barely a century of existence. Augustus built in restraint and left a system that outlasted him by centuries. Nero consumed and was consumed. Domitian ordered and was assassinated in his own bedroom in the Domus Augustana, steps from where you now stand, by a freedman and conspirators including his own wife. Trajan expanded until expansion broke him. And now Hadrian stands here, a new kind of Roman ruler. Empire as inheritance to be preserved rather than territory to be seized. The Palatine Palace in 117 AD is, in the truest sense, a living archive of what power does to men and what men do with power. Its corridors hold the memory of every decision, wise and catastrophic, made within them. Its walls have absorbed the words of senators, the weeping of condemned men, the laughter of banquets, the silence that follows a death announcement. Hadrian understands this weight. There are accounts of him walking these corridors at night, alone or nearly so, reading or thinking. He is a man aware that he stands inside a history larger than himself. His response is to build, to leave behind things that might outlast the inevitable. Temples, walls, villas. a great mausoleum across the Tiber that he designs for himself with characteristic thoroughness. By the late reign of Hadrian, as he grows older, more erratic, plagued by illness and the grief of losing his companion Antinous, the palace's character darkens again. Executions return, senators grow fearful. The golden age that Hadrian's early reign promised curdles at its edges. But in 117 AD, in this specific suspended moment at the summit of the Palatine, in the first months of a new reign, when everything is still possible, the palace holds its breath. The gardens are watered, the fountains speak their endless syllable. The machinery of empire turns in its 10,000 daily rotations, and an empire of 40 million souls continues, improbably, magnificently, to function. Because in these marble halls, someone always rises before dawn, reads the dispatches, and decides